Oh, good to be with you. This is spiritually driven leadership. And I want to talk to you briefly about a subject that I hope to return to multiple times over. This is something that is certainly of importance to me in my life and how I have managed teams, how I've led, and particularly in the ways in which I teach, or at least those times when my teaching has been most successful in my educational context. I want to begin with something first, and then I want to step back and think about it, reflect on it with you, and I want to briefly put forward something of an alternative. You've probably heard it said before that a teacher must know the lesson or the truth that is being taught or the art that is being taught. They must not only comprehend, but know it. They must know it with certainty. They must know it comprehensively. They must know it in some sense in its fullness. They must know it. Of course, you need learners to teach. You need those who are willing and able to attend to the truth or to the lesson being taught. There is the assumption that a language is shared between the two, the teacher and the learner. That must be common to both. Practically speaking, this makes a lot of sense, right? The lesson, though, must be mastered in some sense by what is already known. So if you're going to teach a student or a mentee, then you must teach what is uh, unknown to them by what is known to them already. That makes some sense, doesn't it? Teaching is, in a sense, arousing or bringing about in the student's mind the desire to grasp something new or at least novel to them. Uh, and the learner is a thinker who is trying to gain understanding, who is in trying to become like his teacher, or in the ancient world, like his mentor or his master. He is trying to obtain the objective of what the teacher is giving or what the teacher is communicating. Learning is a kind of thinking that ends or finds its culmination in understanding a new idea or truth of art or of habit or of skill that is being given by the teacher, by the leader, or by the master. And how do we know that something has been taught? Well, we know it because the student is able to relay what they have learned, what they have just learned in light of what they have already known to be true. And they are able to demonstrate their knowledge by way of um, uh, reviewing, rethinking it in their own terms, explaining it in their own terms, reproducing it in some way, or even applying it. So you've heard it before: review, review, review till you master the material. This is commonly what is known as an Aristotelian view of learning or of teaching. There's an age old dialogue um, in Plato called um, the Meno, and in Plato's dialogue, there's a question about whether or not there is such a thing as a teacher, and whether or not it is possible to teach. And in the course of the dialogue, it's a fascinating dialogue. There are a variety of different views given, particularly whether or not virtue is something that can be taught itself, and whether or not there is such a thing as a teacher or a leader who can actually teach virtue to the student or the mentee. And Plato, in a roundabout way, comes back to this question at the end and suggests that, in some sense, um, virtue virtue is you might think of virtue as some kind of excellence. Certainly, in the Aristotelian sense, virtue is intended as an excellence of some sort of faculty that we have as human beings. And so Aristotle would say, of course, there is such a thing as teaching, and there are such things as teachers. Teachers are the experts. They're the leaders because they're the experts. They have a comprehensive knowledge, an ability that their mentees or their students do not have. And so, because they've already learned themselves, they've already gained this virtue in and of themselves, they've already acquired the kind of skill or habit, whether it be intellectual or volitional or moral habit. They've already acquired that. And because they've already acquired it, they are, in one sense, an expert. And as an expert, they can teach others their own expertise, their own skill. And according to Aristotle, what it means to teach is to disseminate not just information, but to lead the mentee or the student to virtue, to acquire the same skills, habits, ideas that the teacher, him or herself, has. Um, Plato tries to get at a more fundamental underlying question about, well, whether or not that's really even possible at the end of the day. Is it possible for there to be a teacher who can teach a student virtue? There's a sense in which, of course, Aristotle's right. I mean, there's information that can be gleaned. We can learn from teachers. There's a sense in which a teacher can disseminate information. There's a sense in which maybe at a practical level, a teacher could show this is how you go about um, carpentry, or um, this is how you go about doing electrical work, or any other skill that we can think of, information technology or computer language, or this is how you, if you're an English learner, this is how you learn German. Of course, there's a sense in which a teacher might be able to do that. But for Plato, there's this underlying sense in which you really can't teach virtue. You really can't teach virtue. Virtue is something that is um, uh, disclosed not through habituation, as with Aristotle. It's something that we have an encounter with, you might say, rather than something that we intentionally set about or something that we intentionally practice so that we can become good at something else. It's something more, and there's something more going on in the whole learning process that is much more exploratory, or a kind of disclosure, even for Plato, a self disclosure that we encounter in the process of encountering reality, or being, or for the ancients, some kind of demiurge, or even a god, or God himself. That in the encounter, that's where real learning takes place. And so learning is a kind of encounter that comes about through experience and through experiment, rather than a kind of habitual, intentional practice of the mind or the volition, as with Aristotle. For Plato, learning is far richer and deeper in the sense that there's a reality that's disclosed in the encounter itself, and no teacher can really teach that. And if you think about it, at one level, um, this there does seem to be some truth in this. There does seem to be some truth in the fact that the kinds of things that we have learned in life, at least in my own experience, the things that I've really learned, the things that have really stuck with me, that have made a mark, that I've become passionate about, those are the kinds of things that weren't sort of directly taught to me or directly disseminated to me by some instructor. It wasn't something that was habitually brought about or something that I just kind of practiced by constant repetition. There's a sense in which those things that I've learned about reality, about the truth, about virtue, have been disclosed to me in an experience and in an encounter with God or with being. And those are the kinds of learning. That's the kind of learning that has made the biggest impact on me. And I imagine for many of us, if we're honest, if we think about it, those are the kinds of things that make the biggest impact on us when we really learn in life. But that's different than the kind of approach to education that we described earlier, the kind of Aristotelian approach, you might say, arguably, the kind of Aristotelian approach that says that we should know the unknown by way of things that we already know, that we know, you might say, with certainty or with that we comprehend, or things that we have a comprehensive knowledge of. This is a kind of built up process where we um, arrive at something that we previously did not know by things that we already knew. Plato flips that on his head, and I think there's a real truth in this, especially if we reflect on the kinds of learning experiences that have made the biggest impact on us. There's a sense in which much of what we know in life is uh, not, we're not certain about, we don't have comprehensive knowledge of. And in fact, we come at knowing things by way of unknowing or undoing of our unknowing or undoing of our learning. And it's through that process that we arrive at new dimensions of learning or understanding, deeper dimensions of understanding and comprehension and appreciation for uh, reality itself. Some have called this well, it's an old term, uh, aporia, you might say, and this has certainly had a it's sort of changed my way of thinking about these things. Um, it's an unresolvable internal contradiction or logical disjunction in an argument or in a theory or in a text. And it's by way of this kind of unknowing that we actually gain knowledge, that we actually come to know. It's by way of unknowing, you might say. It's by way of puzzlement, and through puzzlement, through questioning of puzzling things in life, or through paradoxes or seeming antinomies or contradictions, that we arrive at a greater appreciation of life, being, and God, and what is really real, you might say, or what is truly true, or what is really true. And it's by way of unknowing that we come to know, rather than by way of knowing what we do know, that we come to know what is unknown. I hope that makes some sense. I think once you begin to see it and grasp it, and you actually see it in your life, I think you'll come to see that something like this seems to be the case. It seems to be true of um, our own experiences. And it sounds a bit perplexing. It sounds almost non intuitive, even non commonsensical. And I certainly don't want to undermine common sense or go against common sense. But I think there's something, especially when it comes to the things that matter most in life, the greatest truths of reality, the things that we come to know through our own experiences. Those are the kinds of things that we come to know through a kind of unknowing and a kind of unlearning, um, through a kind of questioning, pondering, uh, and not primarily by way of knowing, but on the basis knowing the unknown on the basis of those things that are already known for sure, certainly, comprehensively, fully. Um, so it's a different way of thinking about the world and ourselves, and it prizes a kind of self-reflection, a kind of disclosure through even experiment, through experience, through encounter, through engagement. Um, and so this way or perspective will have quite a quite a impact on how we think about not only our own learning, but how we think about education in itself and how we approach education and how we approach education in all contexts and walks of life, not just in a formal educational environment, but as leaders and as businessmen or businesswomen. It will impact how we approach the subject. Everything, when it is known by way of this kind of rich and deep encounter with reality, will transform our educational process and how we approach life and others in general.